Hello, wonderful teachers out there. Thanks for joining us again on another segment. So far, I'm calling this specific drip. All the positive, exciting things that we see out in classrooms that we want to acknowledge our teachers for, but also maybe spread around out there because the idea of seeing other people do well and succeed could do a lot of things for us also. So I'm joined today by one of the people I've worked with a long time. I was trying to count the years. It's probably been 6 or 7 now. I've been in this role about that long. And so I've
Yeah,
been coming to visit his class quite a few years. Finally decided to say, hey, let's stop and talk about some of the things you're doing intentionally. Because I think that has been something when I've come to visit and I've even brought other people like from our district resource or whatever, it stood out that Mr. Gunnels here, who's joining us today, really has some skill in being culturally responsive, engaging students, and then I would say leading with lots of high expectations. I remember back when we first started talking, you didn't have students in groups. You didn't really harvest that kind of power, of like kids talking to each other more. I'm just taking you way back to like year one. And I remember you being reluctant to do that some. So I want to explore that a little bit. But let's start with, so we visited fairly recently and y'all were working in a poetry unit that you and your I guess we would call student teacher had kind of worked to extend poetry a little while, and we're bridging it with kind of the foundations of hip hop and kind of the relationship that poetry and hip hop have. Will you tell me a little bit about what pulled you on to doing that work, and then what was it like to do that lesson with your kids?
actually, I was looking forward to doing that assignment. To be honest with you, but I kind of came up with that idea just based off goes way back to like August, and we were like building relationships, trying to find out what they like to do, what they don't like to do, what songs is in. I'm getting kind of old, so they keep me kind of hip to the music, but just kind of figuring out what they like. And that's I always have it. I have very high expectations in the classroom. I mean, that's just one part of it. But I also make sure that the students give me. I want to know their expectations from me. So sometimes each classroom is a little bit different. I consider class hours like a child. Every child is kind of different. You love them all, but they're all kind of you gotta love them a little different. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, like putting their ideas together with the music of choice that they like, and a lot of I got eighth graders, so at this time of their age, there are a lot of some of them will participate, a lot won't. It's not like they don't want to, kind of like I don't want to be embarrassed, I don't want to try this, and somebody laughs at me. So it's kind of get them to want to buy in. So
Mm-hmm.
one way of getting them to buy in, of course, is by doing certain types of poetry or, as you can say, hip hop, or using lyrics that they're used to using, just to catch their engagement. And I think one of the things that really draw my attention the most to doing that was because we were doing like rhyme schemes. And for some reason, we were having like slant rhymes, four different type of rhyme schemes. And for some reason, they were getting confused with how to do a slant rhyme versus a fluent rhyme or a combination rhyme. And so one thing for me to really, instead of looking like a fool in front of the classroom using like the Cat in the Hat type lyrics, I use their lyrics, and then sometimes that would make people buy in. One rhyme at a time, and the next thing I know, they were like, "Hey, Mr. Jones, you ever heard this song? That's a slant rhyme, or that's an eternal rhyme." They were like kind of figuring it out. So I just kind of sat down and said, we got to write some poetry. Let's do some rhymes, some type of rhyme scheme type of rhymes. So we
Nice.
use their hip hop terms, some of their songs they like to use, related it back to the text, and we just kind of combined everything. But they really had a joy doing it. And one of the things I like to buy them in, their age, by the time they get out of eighth grade, they're like getting their first job. So it's kind of like a buy-in system. Hey, you got to do a little public speaking. You can't just get a job and sit there and think they're going to give it to you. You have to be able to talk. And a lot of them never heard their voice before.
Yeah.
So I think that's the
Yeah.
funny thing about it, but watching them grow and be able to do it
Yeah.
is
And
all.
then I was there just for that lesson to hear a lot of student voices that spoke with authority about hip hop, like um, kind of with like full, complete, formed thinking that you hadn't heard them do very much about some other topics. And I wondered, So your discussions, I'd say they didn't feel just like eighth grade. Did you get into some of the deeper parts of life through, like, what were some of the things that came up as a result of having, this target?
Well, one thing I wanted to do was I wanted them to find some type of song, or whether it was a poem or song or some type of verse that just reminds them of them. Like what if you could have your choice of music or whatever it may be, what would you pick and why? So that's to start the conversation right there when they can turn into a partner. I'm also a firm believer, a couple of years of listening to you a few times too, but students learn from each other more than we do sitting up running our mouth. We can say whatever we want to say, but the learning goes on when they're talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to have open-ended conversations, and I like to push them. I have, like you said earlier, I have high expectations. I don't just want it done, but I want things done in a certain specific type of way or form.
Fantastic. Okay, so we'll put a momentary comma in this interview. Okay, so that was that lesson. Let's go way back. Like, what do you think you do now that you didn't used to do? Because we talked about, like, just rows of chairs in a row, and I think you've already admitted that your goals have changed a little bit since then. What do you
Yeah.
think you put in place intentionally now that you
And
would call culturally responsive practices? Like,
well,
even if we tried to define that right now, what would you say a kind of basic definition or your understanding of those three words, culturally responsive practices?
I think having empathy is very huge when you're trying to be culturally responsive, because things come up, and as an adult and as an instructor or teacher, I got to be open to learning too. Like every day, I'm kind of learning something different, whether it's a phrase, whether it's a new movie or something that came out. I mean, whatever goes on. And also, I think knowing your community is huge on being culturally responsive. How can you kind of talk about something or want something to go about if you're not like engaged within in the community, or even knowing what's going on? That's huge.
Yeah, that's huge. Okay. So how about even just the structure of the class? Like, no more chairs just in straight rows.
Oh yeah, that's
What
what I was about to say.
what's your situation like now?
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because I was moving my desk around the other day, and they was like, "Mr. Gunnels, like you move your room around every other day," and I mean, but it depends on what type of activities we're doing. And I
Yeah.
feel like, the kids we work with today, I mean, they're computer smart, right? So doing the same old sitting routine, that gets boring. I mean, me personally, I don't want to go to a professional development. We're just always doing the same thing. I like to get up and be active. I like to learn from the people I haven't seen in a while, and then like to just to get different perspectives. And I think a lot of times, like the grading system, every I don't grade everything. We do tons of work, but everything is not to be graded. A lot of things is just for my
Mm-hmm.
check for understanding, if that makes sense.
What
Participation is
the
huge
value
in the
of doing
choice.
it? Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
I'm
So
with you. I remember that too. Like, how much do we get for this? I'm like, I don't know. How much did you learn?
right,
Like, wasn't there a different goal and then just points and stuff? So
yeah,
that's actually the philosophy of the Louder Than a Bomb poetry tour. Is the point is the poetry, not the points. You
right. And then I kind of think like being able to on certain assignments, you have to find a way to hook them. Like for example, like we're reading the our latest novel we're doing. We actually started right after Christmas break, but it's a narrative of Frederick Douglass, the life of Frederick Douglass. But before I could really jump into that, we had to learn about what he did and what he stood for. So um, I know our kids are like big on the TV type of world. So we watched a Men 14, which is a Netflix special, stars with Neil Smith, and I kind of hit a little bit on the 13th Amendment a little bit, because you really can't go to the 14th without talking about the 13th. But you would be surprised. A lot of people didn't think the kids are going to be engaged. I mean, like we started reading the book. I mean, they come in if we had to do our ready or something for a day. They're like, "Mr. Gunnels, we ain't reading the book. Like, what's going on?" And here we are. We're like two chapters away from finishing it.
Yeah,
So
that's fantastic. Congratulations on that. I know that sometimes feels like the start of an experiment. See how much will we take to this and how much will we really produce, because it's a big
right,
challenge to read a big book, and
right. And then I think setting up different like learning activities while you're reading the book. Like nobody just wants to read and
right.
answer questions, but like a jigsaw, certain type of pages or certain type of questions and responses. But holding kids accountable for their part too. Accountability is huge.
Hmm. Fantastic. All right. So I can see your thinking and your thought process. What about we defined culturally responsive. We talked about kind of how you know when you're doing it in the classroom. Um, I don't know. What other things do you think you could share that you have kind of owned up to over these, was it 6, 7 years that I've known you, that you think other teachers could experiment with, try? In the same light, I guess we're kind of making this themed about culturally responsive teaching. What else is there to it? Like I heard a great speaker talk about learning to go to a third space, Socorro Herrera. Like
Yeah.
when we both read something that may not be from our culture, that like, how do we read that and still be culturally responsive?
And it's a quote I just kind of not too long ago. I may misquote it, but it was something in the terms of you if you share your you can you learn to liberate by sharing your struggles so other ones can liberate to be free. So sometimes I think when I can talk about my ups and downs when I was in eighth grade or what I struggled with to do or what I had a hard time doing, or can you believe I didn't to do this or I never tried this? Sometimes once they hear that, it also gives them that edge. Because it's kind of like sometimes I know a lot of students look at teachers like, okay, well, most students look at teachers like you're the smartest, you're the best person, you probably had no problems and struggles. But when they can hear like, oh, you struggle with reading, you didn't
Mhm,
like to read this certain book, or it was
mhm,
hard for you when you was in the seventh or eighth grade, when they hear those struggles and you can be open,
mhm.
it makes them want to push harder. But also that's part of building relationships because you can have those conversations, it makes them want to buy in more.
Sure.
I'm huge on building relationships. Like, you know, I think when it comes to teaching, a lot of it cannot be done without building relationships. I think building relationships controls the atmosphere of the classroom, your classroom
Mhm,
management, and
mhm.
just also the trust amongst the teacher and the student.
For sure. And then some momentum that starts to build where like we were talking about with this novel, like now you really feel like you're making progress and being more efficient. How do teachers get there? Because I've heard a lot of teachers say like, well, that's all nice and all. I've told them it doesn't
Get that.
happen overnight. It happens real slow,
I
but
get that. And you made me start thinking as soon as you were saying it was kind of it's the buy-in, like, and this goes back to August, September. You cannot get where you are right now without starting back in August or September when the school started or when they first walk into your classroom. And
Mhm,
what I mean by that, we don't like surprises. A lot of people don't like surprises, so give them the upfront load. And I know as teachers, our main goal is to take that, to be successful on that map test at the end of the school year.
right,
I compare that map test to running a mile.
right,
We got to be able to run this marathon at the end of the school year. We
right.
got to get our stamina up.
Yeah.
So sometimes they don't understand. If they know the why, it
Hmm.
pushes them a lot more. So sometimes I think instead of just saying, hey, we're going to do this, we're going to tell them why
Yeah.
why we're doing it, where we're trying to go, where we're at now. And then just having those one-on-one conferences a lot.
Hmm.
Sometimes they need those reality checks. Because
Hmm.
we do know in middle school they go through those phases.
Hmm.
First quarter, second quarter, third quarter comes, it's like two or three different personalities come. They're finding themselves by the time the second semester comes. And some of them forget their actual goal and what they came here for.
Right.
So just being able to have that conversation. And a lot of times, like I said, if you don't start back in August or September, you can't
Hmm.
have those conversations in January and February.
Hmm.
Because
Fantastic. And we've heard
anybody
that from
wants to be a
we've
machine.
yeah, so like working in groups, all these things that might seem a little rough at the start. You're
Working with
saying
people you don't want to work with, working
jump
with,
in, right? Like
yeah,
don't keep putting it off. Just make that part of the things y'all are going to learn how to do together.
right. And just
Yeah.
being organized too and being open for change. One of my biggest pushes, especially when it comes to group work and working with somebody you never worked with before, is comparing like, and I do a lot of eighth grade, obviously. But
That's your world. Yeah.
But by the time eighth grade is over, this is the time when they get their first job. So
Yeah.
being able to keep that in mind when you go get your first job, you can't pick and choose who you want to work with. In the real world, you're going to get fired.
Hmm.
This is the time where you practice and be able to, and a lot, like I said, a lot of them are not used to hearing their voice,
Hmm.
and that comes with just saying good morning,
Yeah.
first thing in the morning. Some of them are
Yeah.
just not used to that. So it's
Sure.
just learning new habits.
Fantastic. All right. Well, you've shared like a whole bunch of wisdom in about 15 minutes, and I knew you would. Like, we just kind of do these little experimental interviews, guys. And Yeah, I hope we do more of these. And so if you're listening and you hear wisdom in some of your coworkers or even in yourself that you're like, you know what, I could tell a story about my growth or the way I approach this profession that could really help some other people, then please just let me know. You know, this low tech approach through Zoom has really been fun, really an affirming way to connect with an educator, and then maybe even show, you know, other people these videos because they'll last for forever. So again, I'm excited to do this work. I'm renewed in hearing, you know, the voices of our staff, just the same way that I was renewed in hearing the voices of our students. So I think if you're renewed by what your students speak to you, then you're on the right path because you let them know how important it is to hear them doing good work and that it makes you want to come to work every day and look forward to working with them. Then I think Vincent would agree with that. That's what we're doing there every day. So
Yeah, and I wanted to add, if I could,
please,
just
please do. Don't let me
I
go out
think
on the last words. Let's let you take it
I
home.
think one of the most important things is to treat every day like a new day. Come in. I know we have, we have those days where you have to keep telling whoever the person may be, got to keep telling Vincent to sit down or Vincent to be quiet or Vincent just don't want to do work today. I'm gonna treat Vincent the next day like yesterday didn't happen. We're
Mm-hmm.
gonna start fresh. So I think, for our teacher mental and
Mm-hmm.
also our building to keep building relationships, treat every day like a new day and always give grace. You
That's
never know
great.
what people's going through. That's
Yeah,
part of being culturally responsive too.
very true. Very true. It's a wonderful thing. And other students watch when you know how to do that and respect you even more for it. And that you
Exactly.
didn't really pick on a person that didn't really deserve, you know, that attention. Something was going on. They deserved a little grace that day. And yeah, absolutely. I think I gained a lot of respect from other people watching how I reacted. And hopefully that was, you know, for the good of the person that I'm caring for, not for just me. You know, it's
Right.
more,
Yeah. And it's kind of like a domino effect too, because those parents know that too. And they're willing
yeah,
to open up and support you more
yeah,
when they know that you're there in an authentic way, if that
very
makes sense.
true. All right. Well, you've heard it here on the specific drip. We've been talking about culturally responsive practices and how we know when we're doing them and what effect they really have on our classes. Thank you so much, Mr. Gunnels. Shout out to Central Middle School. Y'all are doing great work over there.
It's
And
a baby.